Welcome to Gigging, Everything in the Sharing Economy podcast, and I am your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the podcast that's going to provide you news about the sharing and gig economy that is expected to grow to $335 billion by 2025. Welcome back, everyone. This is episode 17, and this is a gigging news episode. And there is a lot to talk about. We're going to give you an update on the coronavirus and what we think that's doing to the gig economy. We're going to talk to you about fashion and how that seems to be catching on as a sharing item in places like Singapore. But I'm also going to give you a commentary back in the context of Corona and how I think it might affect that sort of momentum in that space. We're going to talk about robots and whether or not they're going to destroy the gig economy. And then we're going to look at the future outlook for the Chinese economy. Before all the trade wars and the viruses hit, the gig economy was growing at a very healthy pace. Let us bring you up to speed on what's going on now, since we've seen all these exogenous shocks to the system. We're going to talk to you about manufacturers who are trying to rent out their idle equipment. And I've been on that bandwagon for a while, right, guys? I love asset utilization plays. That's the best part of the gig and sharing economy. It's how I built my last startup that I was able to sell to a Fortune 500 company. And I think there are tons of ideas out there still left to be deployed where asset is being underutilized across major industries. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about how the Saudis are starting to get big in the sharing economy, something we didn't expect 10 years ago. And we're going to also talk about a app-based truck delivery company that's kicking off in Memphis, Tennessee. And we've seen a few of these. This was called Bungii, and they're trying to take on all the delivery service guys. And that's an industry, again, I think that's still ripe for the picking if you can get the right formula for people who have trucks, pickup trucks, all sorts of vans that want to move people's stuff for the right amount of money. And then we're going to wrap everything up talking about LGBTQ and opportunities for taking on players like Airbnb. That sounds like an exciting show. Let's jump right in to Gigging and Everything in the Sharing Economy, the news episode. What's first in gigging news? Well, what's on top of everyone's mind is the coronavirus and what it's doing to the economy and the future of work. And what we've seen in the last 3 weeks is that many organizations and government agencies have decided to have everyone work from home, to stay safe by staying at home and to work virtually. And we've seen lots of people pull this off successfully, and we've seen major products move to the forefront to help make that happen. If you haven't heard of Zoom, you will if you continue to work from home. That has become the product of favor of many education facilities as they try to bring students up to speed on everything they need to know so that they can graduate on time. Lots of businesses are also using Zoom Pro as a way to collaborate as well. You have a number of other players who could potentially win in this space. I'm not going to go into all of them. Check out my podcast, The Strategy Doctor, the latest episode, My Take on the Coronavirus. Remote is the new paradigm. I think you'd want to listen to that and hear who I think the major winners are going to be with this shift in the economy. And I'm saying shift because from this point forward, we're no longer going to work the way we used to work. Everyone's disaster recovery plan is now going to contemplate the coronavirus. And I suspect this won't be the last time we'll see pandemics like this. Now, what is it doing to current gig companies? Players like Uber and Lyft are planning to compensate their drivers affected by the coronavirus for up to 14 days. I suspect that they're going to hit that 14-day mark and keep going. And what is that going to do to their bottom line? Well, it is certainly going to make them run deeper in the red. Remember, these guys had to pay significant upfront bonuses to attract drivers. They certainly don't want to lose these guys in the event that there's delays or a slowdown in traffic from people using Uber. And yes, though you would think that Uber would get a spike in demand, there's also that blowback from people feeling that sharing a car or sharing a service with someone exposes them to a greater threat. And so Uber and Lyft are going to have to do some significant planning, marketing, and execution of some programs to try to tap down the thought that sharing a car with someone is going to spread the virus. But in the short term, they're making the investment to try to keep the drivers engaged so that they can keep their business models working. Postmates and Instacart have unveiled a no-contact food delivery service. DoorDash is letting customers leave in-app instructions if they prefer the orders left at the door. And for those of you who's followed my podcast, you know that I have made a pledge to earn $5,000 in 2020, testing out each of these services to see how well they perform for gig workers. I'm 1/5 of the way there, guys. Can you believe that? And I'm seeing the exact same things with customers leaving specific instructions to put items in the front door, in the garage. I even had one customer give me his code to let me in his back door to put the items in the back door so that he and I would not make contact. That's opening up some significant opportunities for players who have infrastructure that can affect or impact how these transactions work. If you listen to my podcast, The Strategy Doctor, you'll see that one of my predictions is that most garages are going to be converted into hermetically sealed locations where food drop-offs can be made. You take it into the clean area, you leave, and then the customer retrieves it from the clean area and brings it into the home. So you're going to see that become a standard and a building requirement in apartments and homes going forward. I don't like it, but I think that's what's going to ultimately end up happening, certainly on the high end of the market. What's second in gigging news? Fashion, trying to change the topic, is taking over the sharing economy. We've talked about several startups that have launched clothing sharing platforms to give people access to high-end clothing. And now people in Singapore are embracing it head over heels and trying to tap into the fashion movement. And it's not just about fashion. These Singaporean customers see this as a way to be sustainable and to reduce their carbon footprint. According to a Nielsen study, 80% of Singapore consumers are willing to pay a premium for products that are sustainably produced and made using environmentally friendly materials. The study goes on to say that 4 out of 5 of those surveyed were prepared to pay a role towards a low-carbon Singapore if that meant bearing additional cost and inconvenience to the consumer. So these guys see fashion sharing as a way to lower the carbon footprint. And I like that. And you have a lot of new startups that are launching in that part of the world and that are getting some traction. And it's forcing the retailers to rethink how they are marketing their own first line clothing. Stuff that hadn't been shared, hadn't been worn. Now, will that sort of momentum continue in the face of something like the coronavirus? I don't know. I suspect that that's going to tap down some of the demand for shared clothing, given the wild rate at which the virus is spreading. Until someone can prove that they know how to treat and or eliminate the virus from clothing and other materials, you may not get the type of spread that we've seen up to this point for this peer-to-peer platform that we see catching on in Singapore. What's third? What's third, guys, in gigging news? SupplyChainBrain.com, an article written by Robert J. Bowman in March 9th, 2020, asked the question, will robots destroy the gig economy? You know, the first thing I thought of when I heard of this, danger, Will Robinson, danger. Yeah, for you Lost in Space fans, that's the robot. You guys didn't get that? Well, anyway, he asked the question, will the robots destroy the gig economy? Because many of the jobs that we're looking at could potentially displace these workers. I've talked about Kiwi coming out of Brazil. This is a robot Voyager, Mars Voyager-looking device that can deliver medicine and food and be biometrically sealed and does not require a driver. It is simply a rover, right? Looks just like the rover that you sent to Mars. And they are driving these all over campus at UC Berkeley and UCLA, testing it out, trying to figure out if they can drive these rovers all across town, all across campus, up stairs and sidewalks, and seal it on one end and unseal it on the other using biometrics. That sounds like a great solution for the environment that we're living in now, particularly if you can prove through chain of custody that the end packing, the medicines and the food is a hermetically sealed, clean environment, then you're going to get people willing to pay for that service. But that's going to eliminate all the Instacart drivers. That's going to eliminate all the roadie and the Shipt and all the other Amazon drivers who are currently delivering, right? Are these robots going to get rid of all of those folks? Well, Bowman argues not quite yet. With the rise of robots requires people who are going to have to build them and maintain them. And I think that's pretty obvious. So for each job replaced with a robot, you're going to create a new job for people who have to maintain and build those robots until you get to the point where the robots are building and maintaining themselves. But at least in the intermediate term, you're going to get a lift in jobs as the shift in the type of work that's performed by humans move from actual delivery to maintenance. And that's his winning argument. And I like that in the short term. And I think that short to intermediate term continues to be extended out every time a new automation is put online. And that's what he concludes in the article. And I quote, automation will open up a wealth of new opportunities for humans in the area of tech support. Apps and robots can take over mundane tasks such as data entry and manipulation of spreadsheets, but humans will need to do the programming. And I think he's spot on. Until they can outthink us, there's still work for humans, which means we just got to continue to climb the ladder. Unfortunately, they're coming up that ladder very fast. So let's get some exercise and keep moving up as quickly as we can. What's fourth? Fourth in gigging news, the Chinese economy. What do you think? Take your best guess. How fast do you think it's growing? How fast do you think they predict it's going to grow? Everything we've seen, trade war, coronavirus, would you guess double digits? Upper, mid, low? Well, Shanghai News Agency predicts that it's going to grow at 15% annually, and that's starting and sustaining over the next 3 years. The report released by the State Information Center expects the sharing economy to expand by 10 to 15% annually starting this year in 2020 and going out at that rate for the next 3 years. Now, the report does speak to the coronavirus, saying the outbreak will affect sharing economy development this year, 2020, weighing on sectors like home sharing, transportation, housekeeping services, which shocked me, but will create new opportunities in the fields of education, medical care, goods delivery services, to state a few. And those are spot on. For those of you who are at home with your kid watching them take classes virtually, you're seeing many, many more people pop up with different types of opportunities to provide remote or at least what I call arm's length services for people who still want to engage in crowds. And what do I mean by that? Drive up churches. They're popping up everywhere, where people pull in the parking lots and the minister either gives them a frequency or station to tune into, or they listen on their phones and they can have church service while they're still sitting in their car. I've even heard of my church here in Atlanta offering drive-up confessionals, where there's a barrier between the priest and the car, and the person can still complete their confessional. Isn't that special? Isn't that special? Love that. So you're going to see an uptick in other services, even with the tap down in home sharing and in transportation, as I talked about earlier when speaking to Airbnb and Lyft. When you see those tap down, others are going to pop up because there are reasons for people to continue to share the cost of other sectors across many more people than to have a private tutor come to your house. Let's have someone provide shared virtual educational services, and that's popping up. The report goes on to say that there were 800 million people in the country who got involved with the sharing economy sector last year, and that there were 78 million service providers. That's 4% more than the previous year. They also project that the sharing economy platforms will create about 6 million jobs in the country, and that's up 4.2% from the previous year. So all's not bad. And if they find a way to bend the curve on this virus and flatten it out, they're saying 10 to 15% growth in the sharing economy. So that number may go up if they flatten the curve and you get a bump up in some of the services like transportation that we alluded to earlier. What is fifth? What is fifth in a gigging news? Megan Corsano wrote an article on March 5th, 2020 about The Shed, a new startup that's helping manufacturers rent out idle equipment. Shed, she writes, is getting in on the game of bringing product manufacturers the help they need in monetizing their idle assets. Wow, I love it already. The Shed offers a place for manufacturers to store items that might be taking up space, so think tools, outdoor equipment, and even healthcare equipment, while making money off of them. The startup's online platform lists the items available in their warehouse for people to rent them out on a daily basis. Woo, I love that. So you get paid to store it, and while it's being stored, they rent it out and make some money while it's idle. Cool idea. Co-founder and CMO Karen O'Neill began developing The Shed after connecting with Richmond businessman Daniel Perron in Boston last year. Perron, who had previously sold his digital mapping company to Apple, helped O'Neill launch The Shed with the specifications that they be located in Richmond and sourced from Richmond investors. Wow, why couldn't she be from Atlanta? There's no fee to store the items in The Shed. Oh, I hate that. They should get the money too. Wow, they should. But I could see how they could get market share by not charging a fee. And the cost of daily rental for the items is split 50-50 between The Shed and the approved business partner. I'm like Trump. I think I could have negotiated a better deal on behalf of The Shed. Right? You're already getting free rental and you're making revenue off of the idle equipment. So I think I could have gotten a better deal than 50-50 split. The Shed initially tapped into everyday homeowners to store and rent items taking up space in their garage, but shifted their focus to commercial partnerships with individual manufacturers, which is a great shift because some of that heavy asset items go idle for as much as 30 to 40% of the time. When we see that in the farming space, with a lot of farmers now trying to work through co-ops to share big equipment that they can't afford to purchase because they purchase it and then it sits idle and you got to maintain it. So by sharing it with a lot of other farmers, you can possibly break even, but certainly share the maintenance cost with those people who also need that equipment. So by not offering any storage fees, she has attracted tons of providers who want to store stuff in the warehouse, including people like Green Top, who provide kayaks, Yeti, who provides the coolers and fishing rods. You got other folks, coffee makers, home appliance stores, the World Pediatric Project, Dunmar Moving and Storage, all of these folks have jumped in on this because it cuts their costs and gives them a profit center for something that used to eat away at their bottom line. I got to track down this Karen O'Neill and see if I can get her on the podcast and walk us through this business model. Sounds terrific. That was number 5 in gigging news. Now, what's number 6? The Saudis. The Saudis have created a startup to capitalize on the gigging economy. Yay. For lots of reasons, right? So, Khalid Malik writes about their new startup that's matching people who want gig jobs with companies that are looking for gig workers. That's a great HR play. We see a lot of companies doing that, including our friends at Uber, right? I've been saying that for years, that they were going to have to shift their business model, and they're trying to do the same thing, and they're going to do that same business model here in Saudi Arabia. The founder, Mohammed Ibrahim, has launched a startup called Saber, which matches people who are looking for gig jobs with the workers who want gig workers. Great idea. I was participating in one myself last year, helped work on that strategy, so I know that's where the economy is moving, and that's where all the good HR businesses need to be. Since launching in mid-2019, their platform has received over 100,000 job applications from Saudi nationals and have currently staffed hundreds of workers to work with businesses every month. Now, what these guys at Sabre need to do is go listen to the interview I had with Top Coder CEO Mike Morris, because I talked about some of the secret sauce that needs to happen to make matching of gig jobs with gig companies work, and kind of what the future of that type of business is going to be. Having just worked on the strategy for a business like this, I have a clear sense of how the market might evolve and the types of skill and capabilities that need to be underneath the company that will help to create communities around the companies that want to hire. Now, what do I mean by that? Coke and Pepsi are in the same business. They aren't hiring the same type of employee. How do you solve that? You solve that by building communities, and you build communities by having unique algorithms that know the difference between a Coke and Pepsi employee. And that's a little bit what Saber's saying they're trying to do here in Saudi Arabia. They have a proprietary engine which builds a user profile and leverages the analytics within to match workers to job opportunities near them. Now, how deep it goes and whether or not they can tease out a Coke versus Pepsi, we'll see. But that's where I think it has to go. Now, there's some other pieces that need to go along with that to make the business razor sharp. So go back and listen to that interview I had with Top Coder CEO Mike Morris. And if you're interested in this business, you will hear a little bit more about the secret sauce. If you want a little bit more detail, you'll have to engage me through my consulting firm, and I can tell you, or share at least some of my analysis with you, on my view of the market and the types of tools that are needed. I'll leave my contact info in the show notes. What's 7th? What is 7th in gigging news, my friends? Roadie has some competition. The competition's called Bungii, and these guys want to give your friend with a truck the opportunity to deliver bulky items. The Business Journal of Memphis posted an article on March 2nd of 2020 about Bungii, a startup that's now based in Kansas City that has 2 founders, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Harrison, that launched Bungii in 2015 and raised about $10 million in an oversubscribed Series A. Now, here's the funny thing. Most of their money didn't come from the West Coast. It came from Kansas City. And the company is aggressively trying to expand nationally to take on a player like Roadie. Now, Bungii hopes that the nationwide infrastructure layer that they're putting in place to provide on-demand, last-mile, large delivery for big items is going to be a winner for them. Now, here's why I'm concerned for these guys. That's exactly what Amazon is planning to do too. Amazon already has a fleet of package deliverers that are last mile support. Go back and listen to my podcast, The Strategy Doctor, and see why I'm in love with Amazon, or at least partially in love with Amazon. If you go check out my startup Ziskit, you'll see I want to defeat Jeff Bezos. Absolutely. Go check that out. Ziskit.shop. That's my new startup, guys. It is a grocery reverse auction platform. It's a fancy way of saying I'm going to make grocery stores bid on your shopping list, and I am going to defeat Jeff Bezos. So check out my video on YouTube and watch how I make fun of Jeff Bezos. I don't think he likes it because Facebook took down my video. They said it was a political ad. I guess political to Jeff Bezos, maybe. But back to the point. Let's talk about Bungie. So Bungie is looking to be that last mile delivery for large, bulky items. They've raised $10 million. They're trying to go nationwide. But the guy that's going to be standing at the door stopping them from cashing in is going to be Amazon. Because they're going to roll out a fleet of these delivery vans designed for large, bulky items. Bulky as in ovens, refrigerators, microwaves, anything that wouldn't typically be delivered by the standard Amazon van will be delivered now by the bulky unit, and they're going to roll that out nationally, and I think they may have a head start over the guys here at Bungie. You didn't know that, but that's why you listen to this podcast, so you get that kind of information. Bungie now has 40 employees and more than 5,000 drivers, and they require each of their drivers to go through a safety inspection, a background check, interviews, and training before they can start delivering for their service. Sounds a lot like what Amazon's doing already, and they may be positioning themselves to be bought out. But seeing what Amazon's already built, this is going to be a tough uphill run for these guys. But I'm going to try to track them down. I'd love to get them on the podcast as well. What is eighth? Eighth in gigging news. Freelancers, corporations, guess where they're flocking to? Yes, co-working spaces. Go back, check the tape, go back 2 years, listen to not only gigging news, but Guerrillapreneur news, my other podcast, where I was predicting this. I'm telling you, we're at least a year ahead on some of these predictions and telling you where the shifts are going to be in the market. And if you're tracking along in this podcast and making investments the way I am, you're making some money. So what is this February 23rd, 2020 article all about? They're saying, the way we work have changed over the years. Business Insider reports that millions of Americans participate in the gig economy, check, and more are starting to refer to themselves as self-employed, check. And freelancers are not only changing the labor force, as tech companies now are starting to move out to satellite offices, and they're scattering them all across the nation. And that two factors are contributing to the rise of an innovation that's transforming work as we know it. Co-working spaces, yes, they help you reduce the price, and players like WeWork with a multitude of co-working spaces are popping up in major cities across the United States. Absolutely. Now, what did I say about that in the past? That WeWork will become kind of the operating system for the corporations to help them manage their people without owning their people, giving them a culture without the corporations having a hand in that culture directly, but having a hand in it indirectly, so that they can spin up and spin down workers as they need them. And so with that methodology catching on, more and more people and more companies are embracing the co-working space. Well, this article is just catching up with what we've been talking about for the last 24 months. So cool. So just keep listening to this podcast, subscribe and share, and not to pat myself on the back, but that's me patting myself on the back. Well, not completely. I'm still working on that with my hot yoga to get myself to the ability to pat myself fully on the back like I used to when I was 14, 15 years old. Getting there, guys. I got to post more pictures of me doing yoga and showing you my progress in doing the dancer's pose. What is ninth? What is ninth in gigging news? There's a startup out there that aims to be the Airbnb of renewable energy. What's that all about? Herman Leon, in a February 21st, 2020 article that he wrote for The Observer, says there is a new Dutch startup that is looking to be the Airbnb, which means you're going to be able to share your energy with your friends and neighbors and make money off of it. And I can't wait for this. See, this is already happening in Africa with a Bitcoin or a blockchain infrastructure underneath so that you can better manage the relationship. So I'm glad to see this spreading now. And hopefully we can find its way to, North America without much litigation. Because you think Airbnb's getting a ride now? Start messing with electricity and utilities and the billions and trillions of dollars that go to make a power plant and infrastructure work. And those guys are going to get real salty. But I love to see this happening. So the Dutch startup Vandebron is set to help consumers buy electricity from independent producers such as farmers with wind turbines and people with solar panels. Also, people with windmills. We are talking about the Dutch here. What do you think of when you think of the Dutch? Those wooden shoes and the windmills, right, that produce energy. Now, don't mention that to the president. He has a serious issue with windmills that we're not going to go into here. But Vandebron is going to try to help these folks share this electrical power and make some money off of it. There's also a startup called Fuergy. It's a Slovakian startup, and they have a mission to make renewable, effective, and affordable energy for everyone via an AI-powered device that helps users optimize energy consumption and maximize energy efficiency of the renewable energy. That's a long sentence, and I don't know exactly what they do. I'm going to have to dig into these guys a little bit more, but it sounds like they have a way to make the use of the power more effective by either switching the energy between consumption and recharging of batteries so that you can fully utilize the power and not lose any in the pipeline when the sun is down or wind is not blowing or when people are undersubscribed to the device itself or from like the windmill. I'm hoping that's what they do. I'll track that down and make that part of a future gigging news update. So I like the idea. I like what they're doing with this. And this has serious potential, particularly in developing countries where power lines and power prices have not yet affected those economies. This gives a real way to rethink how energy is distributed around the globe. What's 10th in gigging news? LGBTQ-Focused travel platform misterb&b. Now, we talked about these guys 2 years ago, and I tried tracking down the founders, and I'm going to rededicate my efforts to track them down. I did connect with the other person we mentioned in that particular podcast. There were two new entrants into the home sharing space, misterb&b and misterb&b, launched nearly around the same time. misterb&b focuses on the LGBTQ community, and misterb&b focuses on Muslim people of Muslim faith who are also travelers that want a environment tailored to their specific needs. So misterb&b, they're starting to build a lot more momentum. The platform recently lists approximately 1 million properties for rent and serves about 100,000 travelers each year. Man, that's some significant growth since the last time I've talked about them. The team has devoted itself to combating all sorts of crime and intimidation of the community and using tools such as machine learning and smart algorithms to protect the parties who are booking on their platform. I like that. I know around the same time that I talked about these guys first, I talked about a ride-sharing startup called Safer, which was aiming to do the same thing for women in ride-sharing and providing a lot of unique tools that were making it safer for women to ride. And of course, what ended up happening was it made the industry shift and think about how to make rides safer for everyone. So Safer, by innovating, changed the industry. And I got to circle back with those guys and see what they're doing. But I love the fact that misterb&b is doing that as well. So they're trying to fight fraud, they're trying to fight cyber crimes, and they're trying to fight intimidation. I love that, using machine learning and algorithms. The founders state, if we can see that we have a break in the system, we need to adapt our algorithms. We quickly take into consideration these new types of fraudulent transactions. That means we need to be very, very reactive to new ways of creating fraud. Consumers may be comfortable with authentication measures, but they place convenience over security much of the time. This can cause trouble for platforms as customers find out that the verification process is too restricting and will simply take their bookings and listings elsewhere. And I see exactly what he's saying in this particular quote. When you try to create barriers to eliminate fraud and cybercrime and make the process too difficult, people will stop midstream. But this is nothing to play with. As an Airbnb host, I've had to deal with people who tried to commit fraud at my property, who tried to get free stays, who tried to extort money out of me. But having come from the background check industry, I can spot a lot of this stuff coming a mile away. I also, long before Airbnb even suggested having cameras on the outside of your property or monitoring your property in different ways, did that from the front because I understood the opportunity for people to try to create scenarios where they could extort money out of you. As I said, I'm going to have to track these guys down and talk to them some more about what they're doing because I like the growth. I like the fact that they're putting more tools in place than you currently see on some of the mainstream platforms. And I think the first ones that solve a lot of the fraud, but also start thinking through some of the issues that we're now dealing with, coronavirus and safety, health, those sorts of issues, they're going to be the longer term winners. Guys, thank you for listening to this episode of Gigging News about the sharing, gig, and circular loop economies, and a group of economies that is expected to be $335 billion by 2025. If you can't get enough of Gigging News, sign up for my newsletter at sierra.com, where we will keep you up to date with everything we're trying to do with Gigging News. And I'm going to launch a new website soon that will give you all the upcoming shows for all of my podcasts. It's called Guru Radio. And when it goes live, I will post it in the show notes of the shows that are on the platform so that you can get access to it and see what I'm working on before it gets published and interact with me and provide insights, thoughts, and updates and ideas. Would love to get all of that from you. And I'll also have a blog there where I'll share thoughts as I'm working on episodes in the blog that you can also have access to. So I'm looking forward to all of that. Now, if you like what you hear in this show, you may like some of my other podcasts. I mentioned Guerrillapreneur, where I used to do Guerrillapreneur news before I broke it off and brought it over here because it was more germane. But Guerrillapreneur is a podcast for mavericks and startup entrepreneurs. If you're not an entrepreneur and you're not a maverick, you may not want to go up into that podcast because it's interviews with all the folks who are building stuff that's going to disrupt the market. And they're telling you all the stuff they are dealing with. I mean, serious stuff. In episode 52, I nearly broke down and cried with the founder who had built a cookie business that was in 2,500 stores. And he had to shut the entire business down because a business partner could not be depended upon. We talk about the serious stuff there. So if you're not an entrepreneur and you're not a maverick, I wouldn't go up into that podcast. But if you are looking to take that corner office, Career Coaching X's and O's might be for you. In that podcast, I interview some of the leading thinkers on leadership, team building. I recently interviewed Don Johnson in his book, Be the Master. There's an upcoming episode from The Self-Evolved Leader from Dave McEwen. You don't want to miss those episodes where we talk about some of the best thinking on how to lead and build your teams. We just released an episode on how to defeat a bully negotiator. If you've ever had to negotiate with a bully, and I have, it is nothing like you've ever dealt with. To sit across the table from someone who is constantly insulting you, berating you, and putting down your company while still trying to negotiate a deal with you. If you haven't dealt with it, you need to listen to that podcast episode. All of this will be in the show notes. Guys, the gig economy is a use it or lose it world. So let's get to sharing. Till next time, my friends, peace.